So I've got 6 quick wins, which anybody that is around cybersecurity is going to be like, yeah, those are the easy ones. And the problem is, yeah, they're the easy ones, but they're also the ones that are missed the most and lead to the most incidents. One, stop reusing passwords, right? Your Starbucks app password should not be the same as your network logon at your employer.
From Tyler Technologies, it's the Tyler Tech Podcast, where we talk about issues facing communities today and highlight the people, places, and technology making a difference. I'm your host, Jeff Harrell, Director of Content Marketing for Tyler Technologies, and I am so glad that you joined us. Today, we are looking at the threat environment surrounding cybersecurity. Incidents seem to be on the rise, and the public sector has not been immune. So we wanted to bring you some great information and very practical tips on how to bring more cybersecurity awareness to your organization. Today, I talk with one of Tyler Cybersecurity's experts, Ron Barnier, who gives us some insight into the threats and some practical tips to be more cyber resilient. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Ron Barnier. Well, Ron, I know cyber attacks continue to plague the public sector. Why are local governments and schools such an attractive target to cyber criminals?
Well, first off, and I'm going to speak in generalizations, there's obviously local governments and schools that are taking cybersecurity seriously from a financial as well as a training and staffing, et cetera, standpoint, but they're a relatively easy target. Not all, but many of these local governments, especially smaller ones and schools, are the typical hard shell, soft center style of network. These days with humans, right, being the easiest thing to attack for hackers. Once the attacker has fooled somebody, either with phishing or some other sort of technique, then they can just start moving around a network. The organizations themselves have a lot of useful information that can either be sold to other hackers or sold to competitors, other international entities. They've got personal data, right? Financial data, addresses, payment histories, all this information about people. And they can either resell it or simply use it to extort the organization itself. And schools are really an especially easy target. Education, right? The free exchange of ideas means that you have an environment designed to allow, not designed to deny. And when you carry that philosophy over to cybersecurity, generally a recipe for disaster.
And Ron, you talked about hard sell. Could you tell us a little bit more about what that means?
The hard shell soft center. So we've got the firewall that's standing between us, right? Between the hacker and the employees, the students, the teachers, et cetera. But once I get past that firewall as the hacker, the rest of the network is wide open. I can go basically wherever I need to go and do whatever I need to do.
Okay, got it. And then what is the greatest risk or greatest threat facing local government agencies?
So right now, obviously, the biggest threat everybody's facing is ransomware. I'm going to touch on another second threat, though, that I think is going to grow. Everyone's a target, right? Every single PC on the planet is a target for ransomware because everyone wants their data, right? If you didn't want your data, then you don't own a computer. And now the way hackers are operating, just having backups isn't enough. So, back in the day when we were playing on a slightly more even platform with the hackers, you get infected, all of your data gets encrypted. And encryption is basically taking legitimate data, performing a highly complex but reversible mathematical calculation against it, and basically turning it into gibberish. So if you get infected and all your data is now gibberish, if you have backups, you just restore your backups and you go about your business. But the hackers have learned that people were, larger organizations especially, were able to recover from infections with their backups. So now what they do is before they encrypt everything, they do some data exfiltration, basically extort a client infected organization. Not only that, is your data now encrypted and lost, but even if you have backups, if you don't pay us, we're still going to go to the internet and publish all this data about your citizens, your teachers, your students, et cetera. Not only is it just that literal financial and public relations issue, but there's this tremendous amount of service interruption. Get ransomware on a 911 center, and it can be literally life or death. Baltimore, everybody knows about, Baltimore's infection. They were 3 months just getting their water billing back up and running. So, disruption of services is a very lengthy process. Now, besides ransomware, one other one that I personally think we're going to start to see as we move into 2021 is malicious insiders. COVID-19 has had a severe effect on a lot of people financially. There's a lot more people that potentially are in a very, precarious financial situation and are willing to give up access and information from their employer for a dollar amount. So, as this pandemic continues through 2020 and into 2021, we're probably looking at that potentially becoming a bigger issue.
In this internal threat, are people contacted by malicious hackers? I'm just curious on how that transaction actually happens.
So the typical employee, this isn't a typical insider threat scenario, but the typical hacker reach out to people are to hire them as what's called money mules, which is, basically people are going to set up an account. The hackers are going to get money sent into that account. They're going to withdraw that amount and send, 90% of it to the hackers and keep 10% for themselves. So it's a way for the hackers to receive their funds without them being on record as ever having had them. It's been a little less important recently because of all the different cryptocurrencies where being anonymous is a little bit easier, but it's still not completely possible.
And do hackers look for people within the organization that they can contact, or do people within an organization reach out and say, hey, maybe I can make some money with this data? How does that work?
So typically what happens is a hacker will set up a fictitious account, especially, let's say, on LinkedIn, right, or Facebook. Hey, so-and-so, they'll look up, do some research on this person and see they went to, Notre Dame. So they'll start looking for people that they went to Notre Dame, set up fictitious LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever accounts and try to contact them and, friend them, and then start this negotiation from there. Sometimes they're forthcoming with what they're really trying to do. Other times they're literally just trying to defraud that person anyway, by just getting them to send money, because they're in need. They need $1,000 for a plane ticket to get out of whatever foreign country they're talking about, etc. But sometimes it's also to do this money mule or for the insider transaction.
So this is really getting kind of elaborate, some of the things that they're doing.
Well, and that's the thing, right? The hackers have all the time in the world. That's their job. They're literally getting paid and rewarded to perform criminal acts. They're getting really good at it, and they don't need to be terribly successful at it to make a whole lot more money, especially in some of these countries where A, crime is more acceptable against the West, and B, there's not really much opportunities within those economies to make this amount of money.
And that's very interesting. What do you think are some of the challenges that local governments have to combat this kind of activity?
Yeah, so first off, they're underfunded. Nobody likes to spend tax dollars on something that is not a quantifiable threat, right? You think of cybersecurity breaches, it's going to happen to somebody else. And until a local government or a school has it happen to them or happen to a school or government close to them, they don't think it's going to happen to them. Small towns, it's like, well, why are we a target? Why is anybody, they're going to go after the big folks? It's like, well, no, they're not. Because a small time hacker can go after just small communities, make a few $1,000s a week and make more than what they can do, legitimately. These governments and schools are also competing with private companies for the same cybersecurity talent pool that literally is woefully inadequate in numbers. Cybersecurity still has a significant negative unemployment gap, and we likely will for years. Small governments especially have outdated equipment. I was reading, I can't remember where the organization was. It was an HVAC system that was still running off a Commodore 64. Now, when it's that outdated, it's technically more secure than something that's relatively recent because nobody's going to write malware for a Commodore 64. But you get the idea of what these governments and stuff are under with the equipment that they have. And finally, it's just a lack of time dedicated to cybersecurity. Seldom can they find and hire and retain the specific cybersecurity related individual, so that it not always falls under the IT group, right? IT needs to take care of security because it is closely tied to IT. But most IT folks, really, their job is being worried about availability, right? Keeping things up and running and functional. And if we have time, then we'll worry about the security.
If a local government had the time, had the resources, had the budget, what are some optimal ways that they can combat some of these cybersecurity challenges?
First off, there's no silver bullet, right? There's no one control that an organization can implement and say, hey, we're secure. You're constantly, in my mind, you should look at your organization as constantly being in some level of compromise. So, whether they obviously are going to throw in antivirus, they're going to have firewalls, they're going to do, they're going to create domains and try to segregate their networks, right? The 911 system is not where people are browsing the internet and buying from eBay, that kind of stuff. But again, there's no real control. So as you start to layer on control after control after control, right? The first one may literally take care of, 80% of your problems. To use a sports analogy, right? Larry Bird, the widely regarded as the greatest free throw shooter in the history of the NBA, his free throw percentage was 88.6%. But when you're trying to defend a network, that's about 11.3999% too low. The defenders are constantly having to be right every single time. And the hackers, they just need to be, once out of 100. And it's financially rewarding for them to do so.
And I'm a big Larry Bird fan. Love that example. I've heard this idea of continuous monitoring. Why is that essential in quickly detecting threats?
Probably the easiest way to explain that is Richard Baitlick is a noted cybersecurity mind and author. He says that prevention eventually fails. Detection eventually succeeds. So you have all these preventative controls, like I was talking about earlier, layering all of your controls, your antivirus, your firewall, web proxy, etc. Eventually that stuff's going to fail. It's failed in every single breach known to man. If automated systems didn't fail, protective controls didn't fail, then we wouldn't have these incidents like we have. Again, the hackers just need to be right once. The defenders have to review, their firewall logs, their Windows logs, their, every device that they have on their network has to be continuously reviewed for activity. And once you find something that looks suspicious, it really comes down to how well your organization can respond when your prevention fails and your detection doesn't succeed as optimally as you'd like it to. So this, continuous monitoring, it only takes one person clicking one bad link. We can never be 100% secure. We're always going to be, or at least we always should look at our organizations as being in some degree of compromise.
And with the pandemic, more people are working from home. And I'm just curious, Ron, how has that changed the threat landscape?
In a couple kind of severe ways, actually. Most organizations, when they were building their cybersecurity plans, they view their network as what they need to protect. Again, you build the firewall, you separate yourself from the rest of the internet. But this perimeter that they've established is now expanding. It's going well beyond the firewall. Devices are outside of the control of the network, the organizational network, for, in many instances, most, if not all, of the day now. So we're looking at both a technological issue, where the location of everything is changing, the availability of that device to the hackers is changing, but also for the defenders who are looking for normal user patterns. Time of day has become another issue because people aren't working in that same kind of 8 to 5 mode. Some people like to work earlier, some people like to work later. As you expand what is normal, right? Finding anomalies in normal traffic when that normal traffic is becoming itself nothing but a group of anomalies, it gets tougher to find, right? If everything is chaos, finding that malicious chaos gets tougher and tougher.
Yeah, that is lots for organizations to consider. And Ron, I've heard this term endpoint protection, and I'm curious what that is and why it's important.
So endpoint protection basically is putting in layers of control around each individual user's workstation, servers, etc. You typically, always started out with antivirus, anti-malware, that firewall, that proxy. Back in when I first started in cybersecurity, which I actually started prior to my employment with Tyler and Sage, hackers used to try to exploit devices more often. It was attacking a web server, getting access to the SQL database behind it, attacking an application server, getting access to its data behind it. Now they kind of bypass all those technological controls that a company can put in place to protect that, and now they just go right after the human. The hacker, using phishing, which is, sending an email purporting to be a legitimate person or organization and trying to get somebody to click on a link. Come early January, typically, maybe not this year, but early January, Patriots playoff tickets is a great way to get people to click on things. And so the hackers now are kind of bypassing that technological controls and going after the human. So monitoring what's going on the endpoint, monitoring what's going on the workstation, what activity is happening there, looking at, okay, somebody was browsing out to this IP that looks malicious, but the web browser never spawned anything, versus browsed out to that IP that is suspicious, and then the chrome.exe launched, gibberish.exe, which launched a PowerShell command, which did this, which did that. Two very different scenarios. So monitoring what's going on an endpoint obviously is very important these days.
I'll be back with my conversation with Ron Barnier in just a moment. Want to get even more great content on the topic of cybersecurity? Then visit our Tyler Tech Resource Center. Just go to tylertech.com, then hit Resources at the top of the page. You will find the latest blogs, case studies, and more on a variety of topics. I think you'll find the information there very helpful. Now, back to my conversation with Ron Barnier. And Ron, earlier you talked about threat hunting, and that just sounds fun and exciting. Talk to me a little bit about what that is.
Threat hunting is basically assuming your organization is compromised and reviewing evidence to prove that it either is or that it is not. Right? Back in the day, people would wait for their antivirus to tell them they were infected. Well, their antivirus, if it tells you you're infected, it's actually blocked it so you're not. So threat hunting is looking at all of the activity from firewall logs, Windows logs, SQL database logs, web server logs, etc., that are logging everything that was allowed to happen, and looking at everything that was allowed and determining if there's anything in there that's malicious. Again, if these real-time software controls worked all the time, we wouldn't have to do threat hunting. Here at Tyler, in Tyler Detect, we do some threat hunting in real time, but we also then augment it with contextual analysis. Contextual analysis is basically taking, instead of each individual event and assessing it for maliciousness, it's looking at the entire activity of a device or a user or a whole network and determining, if this is all done together, is it malicious? Because I can do, activity A that's not malicious. I can do activity B that's not malicious. I can do activity C that's not malicious. But when I do all of those together, then it can be malicious. Basically, it's the human element, a person. If you want to think about what we do, and in simplest of terms, we are an analyst, security analyst as a service. It is our job to review, what's actually been going on, what your real-time controls are allowing, and looking for that incident, before it becomes something larger than that.
And Ron, this sounds a lot like what a SIM would do. Could you explain the difference between what a SIM does and what you guys are doing?
Sure. So a SIM, which is a security incident and event manager, basically receives all of these logs from all of these sources. Again, the firewalls, the switches, the routers, the SQL database, etc. And what a SIM is really good at, typically, and some obviously are better at starting to equate what we do better than others. But a SIM essentially is really there to index all of that data so that you can search it very quickly. So an organization can do everything we do, no pretense, otherwise. They can install a SIM. They can point all their log data to it, and they can do all of the review that we do. But typically the difference is all of the review that we do is not part of what comes when you purchase the SIM. So in other words, you need to know what you're looking for. The beauty of doing analyst as a service versus trying to do it yourself is if you find something new on your network and you're not sure what it is, you're going to spend time researching what that is. Versus using an analyst as a service, if we've seen that before on a certain number of clients and we know it's legitimate, then nobody needs to continue to research it. So having that power of other companies, other organizations' data being fed to us as well, I think is a big deal in helping streamline, what actually needs to be looked at, what is potentially malicious, and identifying those threats a lot faster.
Well, Ron, you've given us such great information. It's a little bit scary out there, to be honest. I wondered if maybe you could give us at the end here just some practical tips that could help organizations in the public sector at this time.
Sure. So I've got 6 quick wins, which anybody that is around cybersecurity is going to be like, yeah, those are the easy ones. And the problem is, yeah, they're the easy ones, but they're also the ones that are missed the most and lead to the most incidents. One, stop reusing passwords, right? Your Starbucks app password should not be the same as your network log on at your employer. So never reuse passwords. In fact, I go as far as I never reuse usernames. Get a password application like Password Safe or LastPass. I randomly generate all my passwords. I'm really crazy, so I actually randomly generate all my usernames too. So my email address isn't the same across multiple accounts, etc. The second thing is patch everything. Way too many times it always comes down to, oh, that device, yeah, we didn't patch that because that's just a test box. Or it's just a dev box, or the vendor gave us that and they won't let us patch it. Patch everything. And patch, when I say that, I mean more than just your desktops and your servers. Patch your firewalls, patch your switches, patch your routers. Basically, every device you have that connects to your network probably has patches being released that you need to apply.
And for those of us who need layman's terms, Ron, what does it mean to update patches?
So you release, Windows 10 gets released, right? And everybody installs it. And then somebody finds a vulnerability in it. Microsoft will write a small snippet of code that when installed in your Windows 10 will fix that exploit. So it's not an entire re-release of your entire code base. It's just fixing a small portion of it instead of having to install an entire whole new release set. The next 2 really will go a long way to protecting an organization. One is proxy all of your web traffic. There are some, I believe, that are even free. A proxy basically is I'm browsing at my workstation, and instead of going directly to the website, it's going to go to this proxy, and this proxy has metadata about domains and IPs and what's malicious, what type of destination that is, right? ESPN is sports and entertainment. JCPenney is retail, etc. But if you have a proxy, there's going to be a couple categories that are key to be blocked. Number one, obviously all the malicious ones. Anything that looks like malware, malicious site, illegal, immoral, all that kind of stuff. Block all that. But there's usually this one category that sits there that nobody instantly thinks that should be blocked, and that's unknown. Unknown, not classified, whatever terminology the proxy vendor uses. And basically what that means is that the proxy company has not yet visited that domain and determined what it is. Well, not all new domains and hosts are malicious, but almost always all malicious hosts are going to be new. So if you block the unknown, yeah, you'll occasionally block some traffic to legitimate sites that people are going to complain about. But for the most part, until it gets classified as malware, it's still going to get blocked. So proxy your traffic. The other thing is enable multi-factor authentication. And a lot of times people think, oh, but I already have multi-factor authentication. I have a username and I have a password. It's like, no, that's not what I'm thinking of. Multi-factor usually involves getting a text that you have to reply to, getting a phone call that you have to, hit a key, something to validate that, yes, you initiated this authentication and you are who you say you are. Biometrics is a way to do multi-factor authentication, etc. So those two are really big and really will go a long way, especially the MFA from the authentication attacks. We worked with an organization a few years ago, and they wired $500,000 out to an account because the person who got exploited, their password was summer 2018 with a capital S. Right now it's fall 2020, autumn 2020, I guess would maybe be a little bit better if you need a longer password. Don't use simple to guess phrases like that. They can cost an organization literally a lot of money. Two more things I'll give you. One, segment your network. We kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, right? We're not going to be browsing. We're not going to be doing email. We're not going to be buying off eBay on the 911 network. And the students should be segmented from the teachers network and the other organizational networks, etc. And I've seen one last thing. I've seen a lot of organizations do this, and it's really cool that every time there's an inbound email, their email gateway adds a disclaimer at the top reminding them it's from the outside. And that's actually pretty useful because a lot of times people will try to spoof the sender. And if the sender is inside your organization, but yet the email shows that the email came from outside the organization, that's really, really suspicious. So that's 6 quick wins. I do have a bonus for you because I like the number 7 better than 6. Basically, find a control set, right? Like the CIS top 20. If you Google CIS top 20, you'll find it pretty easily. Find a control set and work towards implementing it. It'll walk you through, right from the start. Usually the earliest controls are inventory, not only hardware, but also software. What do we have? What are we using? What is potentially vulnerable? And going through from there, working all the way, through to the end where you're doing, daily or more frequently log review, where you have, acceptable use policies, all of these things that you really need to be secure, keeping in mind that being compliant with those controls is not going to mean you're going to be secure, but it's going to help you do that. And one bit of warning though, Rome was not built in a day, and it will take most organizations a measurement of years probably to work from 0, if that's what they have, to implementing all 20.
Well, Ron, thank you so much for this information. If someone wanted to reach out to you and connect, what's the best way for them to do that?
So they can reach out on our website, tylertech.com. They can email me directly. It's ron.barnier, and that's BERNIER @tylertech.com. Or I know we have a number of links on our website to contact the various representatives that we have as well.
Well, Ron really knows his stuff, and in a time where we really need some cybersecurity resiliency, he gave us some valuable information and very practical tips. Well, thanks so much for joining us and listening to the podcast. We have episodes that drop every other Monday and lots of great information headed your way. This is our last episode for 2020, but we've got lots of great and exciting things planned for 2021. So please subscribe. Until next time, this is Jeff Harrell for Tyler Technologies. We'll talk to you soon.